Whereas Michigan's offense returns a plethora of talent and starting guys all around the field, only losing two offensive linemen by the names of one of them flat out escapes me. The other one is Andrew Stuber, who was drafted by the Patriots, losing one of their key running backs, Hassan Haskins, to the Tennessee Titans. The other one is Blake Corum, and he returns, and I think he's a top 10 running back, potentially higher. And backup wide receiver Dalen Baldwin, who I think was an undrafted free agent with the New York Giants. I might be wrong there, but anyway, case in point, the offense returns a lot. There are questions surrounding it only because Jim Harbaugh's offenses at Michigan seem to be the weakness of the team, but they return a lot. Michigan's offense this past season was its most efficient and best performing of the Harbaugh era, especially in big games. It was the most explosive offense. So there's a lot of encouragement going around there. And Michigan might have its best passing offense of the Harbaugh era entirely, along with the run offense. Might have the best offensive line in the nation yet again. You know the drill. I've already made a video on this. But I'm explaining this in the first minute here or so because the defense is the polar opposite. The only thing the offense and defense for Michigan have in common is they lost both of their coordinators. Josh Gaddis obviously going to Miami, Mike Macdonald going back to the NFL and back to the Ravens, where Jim Harbaugh took him from his brother, John Harbaugh. That's the only thing the two units really have in common, because the defense loses 8, might be 9, but it's 8 or 9 of their starting guys from the 2021 year. A defense that was top 10 in scoring and a defense that was top 15 in efficiency. We'll get to more of those specific numbers in a minute when I want to discuss Michigan's defensive reputation and some other things. But Michigan loses a plethora of talent on defense. Michigan luckily returns all of their assistant coaches outside of Sean Nua, who was hired at USC, but they bring in who I think is an upgrade at Mike Elston. And there was some shuffling around at different positions. Ron Bellamy went from safeties to wide receivers. But the same core group of guys, Steve Clinkscale, who I think is possibly now the most valuable member of the entire staff outside of the coordinators and the head coach and such. You have him who returns, George Hilo, who coached the linebackers, coached Josh Ross, David Ojabo, Junior Colson, who was a freshman All-American, and Mike Elston has done wonderful work at Notre Dame. And Jesse Minter, who, yes, he did coach Vanderbilt, and their defense was atrocious, but he was only there for 1 year. He helped recruit one of Vanderbilt's best recruiting classes, and he's coached at other low-level programs. Granted, they don't have the same competition that Vanderbilt does in the SEC. He coached them to having fantastic defenses and was a Broyles Award finalist at some point nearly a decade ago. So he has a resume, and unlike Mike Macdonald, he can recruit, because from how I understand it, Mike Macdonald was rarely a part of the recruiting process. So Michigan's staff on defense seems, I would say, set. But there are questions surrounding who's going to be starting. Will this unit have the same amount of talent, the same pass rush, the same edge to them on the field in players that they did this past season? Like Aidan Hutchinson, David Ojabo, X-Factor players. Daxton Hill was a 5-star out of high school and a first-round NFL talent. At least we can assume so. If he turns out to be a total bust, then you can write that statement off. But that'll be found out in the next few years. We're in the present here. Michigan had a lot of talent on defense last year. And yes, this was the same unit last year that was horrendous under Don Brown, that had thin sections of it because of Don Brown's poor recruiting and management. And Mike Macdonald, Steve Clinkscale, George Hilo, and Sean Nua, and Ron Bellamy, because he was coaching on defense last year, took the unit that, if we're going into specifics here, was 106th in efficiency in 2020, according to ESPN. Michigan's defense was that bad. And 95th in points allowed per game, allowing 34.5 points per game. Or in English football terms, that would be 5 touchdowns a game, and occasionally a missed extra point here and there. maybe not, which is a horrendous statistic. That unit went from that, and with an improved staff, turned around, was 13th in efficiency in 2021, and you may be thinking that that's even like low, under advertised. In fact, 3 of Harbaugh's teams had more efficient defenses according to ESPN. But I understand this because Michigan, the defense, it was great. It was 8th in points allowed per game with 17.4, so the improvement was obvious. It did have a lot to work on, though. It was not great in defending the run. Maryland, Penn State, Michigan State, and yes, Michigan State had Kenneth Walker, but those 3 teams had some of their best rushing performances against us, and all 3 of those teams did not have good O-lines. So the run defense obviously had room to improve last year. We'll see if it improves this year, but I think the pass rush will obviously take a step back, and we'll get into more details, and we'll talk about the depth chart, or at least what I think the depth chart and the starters will be in a few minutes here. But before we get into that, I want to discuss something. Michigan's defense, a lot of people I have seen who are talking about it have a real belief that this unit can totally go back to what it was in 2020. Totally. Whether it's from fans in the Big Ten, more specifically Michigan's rivals, Michigan State, Ohio State, mainly Ohio State fans, actually, in my comment sections talking about how this Michigan defense completely carried the team last year, and that they lose this much, they're going to slide back to being a horrible unit, etc. Now, I am a Michigan fan, but I am not going to sit here and be biased and tell you that this unit is going to be a top 10 unit. I think it will be good. I think it can be a top 10 unit because Harbaugh teams in the past have been completely gutted on the defensive side of the ball, and they return and are great the season afterward, and we'll look at that in a few seconds here. But there's also a lot of talent here. But there are a lot of unknowns as well. This unit could easily be a fringe top 25 defense. It could be top 50. I just don't think it will be a bottom 30 or bottom 40 in the country like it was in 2020. Harbaugh teams have been known to be good on defense, regardless of how much they lose or gain. And obviously the one exception to that was in 2020, and that's because Don Brown went from being one of the nation's better DCs in 16 and 17 to him not adapting, and quickly Ohio State, Florida, teams with good offenses quickly figured out his defensive schemes, and they exploited them. And that's what got us into the 2020 season. And you see that through the years when Don Brown was a DC, how the efficiency rankings and points allowed per game rankings, they drop. So let's check them out. 2015, so when DJ Durkin was defensive coordinator, Harbaugh's first year, Michigan's defense is 20th in efficiency. They're 6th in allowed points per game, only allowing 16.4. In 2016, the 2016 squad returned a good chunk from the 2015 squad. 2016, the defense was 3rd in efficiency, 2nd in points per game, only allowing 14.1. And this defense, if I'm being honest with you, yes, it wasn't as clutch, nor was the offense. No team in the Harbaugh era was as clutch or strong-minded as the 2021 unit, at least for now. But the 2016 unit by talent, and really just by talent, is probably going to be Harbaugh's best unit of his entire career. 3rd in efficiency, 2nd in points allowed per game is quite an impressive statistic. They also held Penn State, who probably had one of the Big Ten's better offenses that year, and who won the Big Ten, to 10 points while they hung 49 on them. In 2017, Michigan loses a lot from the 2016 squad. Taco Charlton gets drafted, Jabril Peppers, several others. They leave. Michigan's defense only drops to 9th in efficiency, 13 in points per game with 18.8. The defense was worse. It was more vulnerable to the big play, but that's in part because the offense was so bad that the defense had to do everything to win games. It's the same problem to draw a correlation that Mark D'Antonio had in 2018 and 2019. good defense is great, but if you don't have a good offense, your defense is going to eventually wear down. And that's what happened a lot with Michigan in 2017. 2018, Don Brown's third season, a raise in efficiency to 7th in the nation, dropped to 16th in points allowed per game with 19.4. In 2019, 19th in efficiency, 25th in points allowed per game, 20.7. And this is where the exponential drop lands us to 2020, which, if you look at all the stats, efficiency, points allowed per game, which I think are the two that matter a lot, that's the exception to the rule. 2020 is 106th in efficiency, 95th in points allowed per game. It was one of the Big Ten's worst defenses, and I think it was probably the Big Ten's most inefficient defense. And if ESPN says otherwise, I think they're lying, because that defense had a lot of talent on it. Outside of Penn State, it was and Ohio State, it was probably the most talented defense in the Big Ten. So the third most talented defense in the Big Ten, allowing nearly 35 points per game, made Rocky Lombardi and Noah Vedral look like NFL prospects. It was ridiculous. But the point stands. That unit's the exception to the rule. I see no reason from Harbaugh's resume, from Jesse Minter's resume, from really any resume of any assistant coach on the defense, that this unit will slide back to being as horrendous as the 2020 unit. Even with the amount of departing starters, Michigan, remember, still has 4 stars and 5 stars, and they finally have a defensive staff that is developing and properly applying their talent, which is what Don Brown did not do from probably 2019 to 2020, and he certainly wasn't adjusting before then. It was only in the year 2018 and maybe parts of 2017 where offenses finally figured out his schemes and truly began to exploit them, and it eventually, of course, caught up to him. So I don't think Michigan's defense is going to take a step back to the point where they are an awful unit. I don't think that that is possible. In the same way that I don't think this defense is going to be, it's not going to be the same as this past season's unit. It won't be. I think that with the easier schedule, you might see them statistically improve. They might allow even less points per game, but remember, that would be a mirage because of the easier strength of schedule. I think that this unit here, and don't worry, I'm going to talk about the projected lineup in a few seconds, but I think this unit, it will slightly improve in defending the run, and it will take a moderate to big step back in pass rush. In order to get the same pass rush effect that Michigan had last year, we will have to scheme it more. We will have to blitz more. We will have to send more men forward than we did last year. So even though it won't be like Don Brown's defense and the fact that it is stiff, it can adapt, and frankly, it makes me want to throw up or have, not a heart attack, but I forget what it's called. Gosh, like heart pain or something, like acid reflux. The Don Brown's defenses are disgusting, but it'll sort of look like it in the sense that you're going to see a lot more blitzes in order to generate a pass rush because Aidan Hutchinson and David Ojabo are gone. And speaking of the projected lineup, Mike Morris and Braden McGregor, who I think are good players, and I have them both on my all Big Ten team. A video about that will be out in the next few weeks, months. I just want to get more information and maybe get some insights into summer and fall camp before I release that video. I don't think those two are Aidan Hutchinson and David Ojabo. I think that's pretty safe to say. If I said that, you could comment down below that I am definitely biased. They aren't. They're good, and I think that they will show the Big Ten that they are good. They're not at the level Aidan Hutchinson and David Ojabo are. Let's look at some of their stats from this past season. Braden McGregor had like 5 total tackles. He got some playing time, but was obviously a backup. Mike Morris, on the other hand, actually got some playing time. He had a half a sack. He had a pass defended. He had an interception, and he had 16 total tackles. That right there is your projected edge rush duo. Mike Morris, Braden McGregor. I know that on ourlads.com, there's Jalen Harrell listed as the edge player. I thought that Michigan they run a 3-4 from how I understand it, but from what it sounds like to me, and ourlads.com, which I do use, isn't always the most accurate. I'm thinking that it's going to be Braden McGregor and Mike Morris who are that edge rush duo, but you also have, again, Jalen Harrell, you have Taylor Upshaw, you have TJ Guy, you have a lot of different young men who are talented enough to be in this rotation, who can be in that defensive end type position. I know Ojabo was listed as a linebacker, same with Jalen Harrell and Taylor Upshaw on this depth chart, but I would put them in the defensive end category because that's essentially what they were. They were edge rushers. They were raw pass rushers. David Ojabo was not very good at defending the run, and he was used to mainly rush the passer, At defensive tackle, you have Mozzie Smith and Chris Jenkins are your projected starters at defensive tackle. I know that for a fact that Mozzie Smith he's a talented player coming out of high school. He had playing time last year, was definitely in the defensive line rotation. He had 37 total tackles, 3 passes defended. I think that Michigan's defensive tackle play will improve, especially with Mike Elston here. Again, I think he's an upgrade over Sean Nua. Just look at his resume at Notre Dame, producing several NFL prospects. Notre Dame this past season actually had, yes, they played an easier strength of schedule, but they had more sacks than Michigan did, and their defensive line was a huge part of that. And Mike Elston can also recruit very well. He was the primary recruiter of a lot of guys on Notre Dame's current number 1 recruiting class for 2023. So he can recruit. He has a track record for developing. I think that defensive end play is going to take a sizable step back. Defensive tackle play will, I think, though, take a step forward with Mozzie Smith, Chris Jenkins being better able to stop that running attack. At linebacker, Junior Colson and Nakai Hill-Green are the projected starters there. That's no surprise. Colson actually started a few games despite being a true freshman and was named a freshman All-American by several sites, including 24/7 Sports. Junior Colson, this past season, had 60 total tackles, a half sack, 2 passes defended, and a fumble recovery. A fumble recovery that helped us beat Rutgers. That game was probably the worst game played of the entire season by my Michigan squad, nearly losing or nearly choking to a 5-7 Rutgers team. And then you have Nakai Hill-Green, 50 total tackles, 1 pass defended. The linebacker core, funny enough, even with Josh Ross and David Ojabo, if you count him as a linebacker departing, they probably have the most returning production and statistical experience, is probably the linebacker core. At the same time, you also have Rod Moore, RJ Moten, DJ Turner, and even Jamon Green. I mean, those 4 all were in the secondary rotation. The secondary, there had to be rotations because outside of Daxton Hill and DJ Turner looked great at points as well, there was no really great player. Vincent Gray actually took a big step forward. I know he isn't returning, but I think him going from one of the worst corners in the nation to actually being good and covering great wide receivers well, I think that shows the level, just the change of staff from 2020 to 2021 and how the staff went from being pretty mediocre to a certain degree not even knowing what they were doing to being one of the better defensive staffs in the country. Going back to just talking about some statistics, DJ Turner had 33 total tackles. He's defensive back, projected corner. 7 passes defended, 2 interceptions, one of which he returned for 6. And you also have Jamon Green. You have Mike Senra still, who's converted from a wide receiver to a defensive back for this season. He is, let me tell you, I went to Michigan's spring game, attended it in person, and yes, Cade McNamara did not look the greatest in that game. In fact, that game told me that even with McCarthy's injury, McCarthy might start over him. I still hold that opinion. Senra still was locked down. He played the part, he acted the part, he had a few pass breakups, he looked great. And for that reason, he's on this list as a projected starting corner. And at safety, which I skipped over, but I'm going to return to, you have Rod Moore and RJ Moten. And they certainly had playing time. RJ Moten had 35 total tackles, a pass defended, and an interception. Rod Moore had 33 total tackles and 1 pass defended. Those were your projected starting free safety and strong safety. Michigan, again, running that 3-4. You wouldn't think that I would know that by how this lineup is projected, but with David Ojabo being used primarily, even though he was classified as a linebacker, as an edge rusher, I just like to make it simpler, put Braden McGregor or Mike Morris or whoever is going to be kind of at that hybrid linebacker, pass rusher position, just put him at defensive end, because that's kind of what they are, just a pass rusher. But Michigan's defense, just looking at all of this, a lot of new faces. The unit on the field, not on the sidelines, but the unit on the field is going to be completely different, especially at D-line, which was the part of Michigan's defense that really determined the game. If they couldn't stop the run or rush the passer, the game was either a close game or a loss. The Michigan State and Georgia games, for example, where Michigan couldn't stop the run for the life of them in the Michigan State game, even though they could rush Peyton Thorne. Against Georgia, they couldn't do anything. Nebraska, they couldn't really stop the run too well, nor could they get to Martinez. Close win, for example. And there are other examples of this too. I think the Rutgers game would be another one. Even though Rutgers didn't do well offensively against us, we're so much more talented than them. It doesn't matter if our defense was performing top tier or not. By talent alone, we really just beat them, even though they gave a lot more effort. But anyway, Michigan's defense, expect the pass rush to take a sizable to even big step back. It's going to have to be manufactured and schemed better in order for the defense to have the same pass rush effect as last year. I think the run defense is going to improve, but don't expect it to improve to the point where if we face someone like a Kenneth Walker, we all of a sudden just lock them down. I don't think that's going to happen because you lose experience at defensive tackle, both of your starters. Christopher Hinton was a 5-star. You no longer, even though he wasn't great, you no longer have that raw talent 5-star presence at defensive tackle. You got Mozzie Smith, Chris Jenkins there. So expect the run defense, I think, to slightly improve. Again, the pass rush, take a sizable step back. And that's really all I have to say for this video. I think that it's lunacy to say that Michigan is going to go back to their 2020 selves on defense. I think that's wishful thinking by people that dislike Michigan. But I also don't like it when people talk about this Michigan defensive unit as if it's just going to be the same, if it's just going to immediately reload. I think for the most part, it's going to reload, because if it didn't, there would be a sizable overall drop-off, and I don't think that's necessarily going to happen. But the defense is going to look different because it will have to be different in order to be a good defense. And great coaches, great staffs, they adapt, they find a way to, even though not everything goes their way in returning production, they find a way to produce. And I think that's what this staff will do. And I think this defense will be a great defense. It won't be an elite defense, won't have the same pass rush presence, but it will be a great defense. Just won't look the same, won't be terrible, but also won't be what I think, let's say, Alabama's or Georgia's will. Won't even be close to that. And other teams who have solid defenses, like, let's say, Wisconsin from last year. Again, that's all I have to say for this video. If you liked it, hit the like button, hit that subscribe button, click the notification bell, and comment your thoughts on this video and how you think Michigan's defense will look in 2022. I'm curious to hear from everyone, whether you're a Michigan fan, Michigan State fan, Ohio State fan, teams who saw Michigan's defense in 2021 from all different angles. I'm curious to see your opinion, so comment down below. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys around. Bye.